I think the important thing about African drug markets is that they have changed in important ways over the last number of years. And one of the reasons for that is increased drug production in two areas outside of Africa, but on the western side of Africa, the Andean region for cocaine, and on the eastern side in Central Asia, and then down the East African coast. And then on the African continent and with other global connections, there's a change in the meth market, methamphetamines. And a combination of these three, I think, are setting or complicating the position on the continent, and it's really an area that, for that reason, needs to be dealt with. And I think we don't. Drugs in Africa has often been a story of cannabis or cat or a range of other things in the past. In this changing drug economy, there are 3 or 4 impacts which I think need to be understood. The first is local use. So Africa had always been a transit economy, and over the years that has changed in important ways. And there's a much larger user population that has enormous public health implications. It has urban management implications, particularly because clusters of users are gathered in major urban areas. So that's the first impact. The second impact is that the profits from the drug trade are embedded or become embedded in the continent's political economy. And so you have money which is unaccountable being pushed into the political process, and there's a strong desire by key political actors, people with influence, business, politics, overlapping into crime, who provide protection around the drug economy in particular countries. And that changes and distorts the political economy in ways that are not always visible. So that's the second impact, which I think is important. The third is the overlap between the political economy of drug markets and conflicts in the continent or on the continent. And there are 2 dimensions to that. The first is in civil wars or conflict which is more visible, and whether drugs become or drugs connect to, for example, violent extremism, whether they fund sides within conflicts, or, and this is at a lower level, but perhaps at even a higher level or volume of violence, is that is in many cities you are increasingly getting formations, whether they are gangs or other forms of armed formation which protect the drug trade. Now, the most visible and the oldest of those are gangs in, for example, Cape Town, but you get elements of that within Nairobi, within Kinshasa, and elsewhere. And because those are groups of armed young men, they are often a resource for local politicians. They provide a system in which the drug trade and market and sale is protected. So to summarize, the impacts for Africa are really local: use, influence on political economy, connections to violence and conflict. Those are only 3. And the reality is that often we don't see those connections because we're talking about Africa as part of the transit trade only.